What we have is we have a humble servant. He received a grand invitation and he offered a humble response to the grace, to the mercy that was shown to him by the king. The second thing that we find here as we read through, if you look at verse 7, he says, "So David said to him, 'Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually.'" What I notice here is as I read through 7, you read verse 7, you read verse 10, you read verse 11, you read verse 13, there is a common thread taking place. Not only was Mephibosheth a humble servant, but he also became, number 2, an adopted son. He became an adopted son. See, this is what I love about the king. He calls him out. He seeks him out. He finds him. He's the one who makes the way for Mephibosheth to get there. When Mephibosheth responds favorably to the king's invitation, says, "I will be your servant," then what does he do? He says, "Okay, you're going to be more than my servant. I'm going to make you my son." What do we see up under that? Up under number 2, always eating at the king's table. Always eating at the king's table. Now, he appoints Ziba to take care of all of these things from Mephibosheth. But one thing he constantly says, we see it as a thread all throughout the remainder of verse 9, is that Mephibosheth is constantly eating at the king's table, just like one of the king's sons. You see, when God calls you and when God calls me, he doesn't just call us to be his servants. He calls us and he makes us his son. And this is what I picture in my mind. I want you to picture, I'm a visual person. I'm a visual person. And this is what I imagine in my brain. You have poor little Mephibosheth, just brought in from Lodabar, cripple in both feet, overwhelmed a little bit at this point in time probably, with all he's seeing and with all he's encountering as a result of what the king has done for him. And all of a sudden, he's brought in, and he is eating at the table with the king and all of the rest of the king's sons. And if Mephibosheth is anything like me, I can tell you the one thing that would be going through my mind if I'm Mephibosheth. I'm the only one at this table that's crippled in both of my feet. I have nothing to offer this king that all the rest of these guys have to offer. That's the one thing that would be going through my mind. If he's anything like me, that's the one thing that I would be thinking. Because I tend to be the one that focuses on what I can't do. But this is what I imagine. Just picture this with me. And if you don't want to, I'm sorry, you'll just be lost from everybody else. But this is what I picture. I picture this long table. And I picture all of the king's sons being brought around that table. And Mephibosheth, the new guy. Oh, what it's like to be the new guy. And I picture Mephibosheth being brought up to the table, seated at the table. And he's looking around and he sees all of these guys. They've been there. The king knows what to expect out of this one. And he knows what to expect out of that one. And he knows what to expect out of that one. And here he is, poor little crippled Mephibosheth. I don't have anything to offer him. Once he finds out that I don't have anything to offer him, he's going to realize what a big mistake he made by choosing me. And he's pushed up to that table. And there's this long, white, flowing tablecloth. And as he's pushed up to that tablecloth just covers those lame, crippled legs. And all of a sudden, David comes in from a door at the end of the room. And he pulls up to the head of the table. And he sits down. And he begins to eat the meal with all of those sons that are sitting at that table. And one thing that David never sees are the crippled legs of Mephibosheth. To David, Mephibosheth, his new adopted son, is just like all the rest. You see, you and I, we're the ones that focus on our weaknesses. God focuses on what we can do. Think about Paul in 2 Corinthians. He said that I prayed 3 times for God to take the thorn out of my flesh, and he wouldn't do it. And through it, I've learned that it's in my weakness that God makes me become strong so that he receives the glory. And I believe we see that in Mephibosheth. David was not concerned about the crippled legs. He was not concerned about the fact that he was lame. What David was concerned about is, I have shown you favor. And in response to that favor, you have come. You have said, I will be your servant. And I am willing to make you just like all of the rest of my sons. Welcome, you're here.